My name is Olivia Grant. I'm 67 years old. For most of my life, I worked as a case records clerk at the family court in Marlow County. Nothing fancy, just paperwork, filing, dates, and details. I wasn't the one in the robe. I was the quiet one in the back who remembered everything. And that morning, I was back in court. But this time, I wasn't there to type minutes or carry files. I was being sued by my own daughter. Camille sat on the opposite side of the courtroom. She didn't look at me, not once. When I entered, she scoffed. I saw her lean in to whisper something to her husband, Ethan, and they both smirked like I was some unwanted guest who had shown up at the wrong address. But then the judge walked in. He opened the file, started his usual introductions, then paused, mid-sentence. His eyes stopped on me. He blinked, adjusted his glasses, leaned forward a little, like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And then, "Wait, is that really her?" A hush fell over the courtroom. Even Camille turned toward me. I felt her confusion ripple through the room. No one knew the truth about me until that moment. They thought I was just another elderly woman who couldn't keep her affairs in order. Just another lonely widow whose memory was going soft around the edges. A burden, an obstacle, a signature they needed, but they had no idea what I used to be. And more importantly, what I still remembered. You see, people forget the power of someone who observes. They forget the danger of someone who listens more than they speak. Camille had always been a bright child, but somewhere along the way, she learned to roll her eyes at where she came from. She started seeing my house, the house where she took her first steps, as an asset, not a home. 3 months ago, she came to me holding a brochure for a retirement condo by the lake. "I know you love the water, Mom," she said, setting the paper down like a peace offering. I made tea that day, the same way I always do. Earl Grey, 1 sugar, a chipped ceramic mug Gerald gave me on our 25th anniversary, still had a crack running down the side like a quiet little scar. "I'm fine here," I told her gently. But that wasn't the answer she wanted. I saw it in her face. A week later, Ethan showed up with legal papers and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Power of attorney documents, house appraisal forms. "Just sign here, Mrs. Grant. We'll take care of everything." I asked them to give me a few days. They gave me 2. I could have argued, could have raised my voice, but I didn't. Because what they didn't know, what no one in that courtroom knew, was that I had already opened the drawer in Gerald's old desk. The one with the false bottom, the one even Camille never found. And in there was everything. Dati all. Camille and Ethan thought they were dragging a confused old woman into court, but the truth was, they had walked into a room where my name still meant something, and the man behind the bench, Judge David Morales, he had once been a scared, struggling intern in Courtroom B 34 years ago. I had given him coffee when no one else would, stayed late to help him reorganize a case he'd messed up. And when his father died, I had written a note, not as a superior, but as someone who understood quiet grief. He had kept that note, and now, here we were, years later, Camille tried to make me invisible, but her own ambition had led her straight into the hands of a man who remembered who I was, even when she had forgotten. They wanted me to shrink, but I had learned long ago that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to simply show up. Camille used to call me her safe place. I still remember the birthday card she made when she was 7, scribbled with glitter glue and crooked hearts, folded twice and sealed with a purple crayon kiss. It said, "Dear Mommy, you are my hero. You are the safest place I know. Love, Camille." I kept it in my dresser drawer for years. Still do. It's yellowed now, the edges curling like old leaves, but the words remain, faded, but stubborn. These days, she doesn't call me Mom anymore. She calls me Olivia, like a receptionist, like a case file, like a stranger. I don't remember when the shift happened exactly. Maybe it was after Gerald passed. Maybe it was the first time she said, "You should think about downsizing." Or maybe it was the morning she showed up at my front porch unannounced, holding a manila folder and a tight smile. Ethan was with her, of course. They stood there like realtors, like people who had rehearsed this moment in a car ride over. "Olivia," Camille said, not even blinking. "Can we come in? Just for a minute?" I stepped aside, not because I wanted to, but because it was still her childhood home. Even if she had already packed away the memory, they sat at the dining table, the same table where Camille once spilled juice on her algebra homework and cried like the world was ending. Now she was folding documents with lawyerly precision. Ethan did most of the talking. Camille nodded on cue, like she was being coached through it. "Your home has appreciated in value significantly," he said, tapping the papers. "There's a buyer already interested. It would cover a place for you, closer to town, easier to maintain, with support services." Support services. As if I needed help brushing my teeth or remembering how to lock a door. I looked at Camille. She avoided my eyes, focused on the paperwork. The corners of her mouth were pulled tight, like she was clenching something inside. I noticed she wasn't wearing the necklace Gerald gave her, the one he saved for months to buy. She always said she'd wear it to her wedding. She didn't. Instead, she wore something Ethan gave her, sleek, shiny, hollow. I didn't touch the papers. "I'm fine here," I said calmly. Ethan chuckled, as if I told a joke. Camille leaned forward. Olivia, it's not about being fine. It's about planning ahead. It's about safety." "Is it about safety?" I asked, or is it about the market being good right now? She flinched, just slightly, but I saw it. They had already made up their minds. Ethan went on about taxes, maintenance, future medical expenses, and the unpredictability of aging. He used words like liability and capital gains, as if my life could be summarized by numbers on a spreadsheet. Camille remained silent. That hurt more than any signature line they asked me to fill in. Because once upon a time, she used to speak for both of us. She used to run to me after nightmares. Now, she was helping a man with a finance degree evict me from the home where I birthed her. After they left, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The same mug of tea had gone cold in front of me. Earl Grey. 1 sugar. Gerald's mug. Still cracked. Still whole. Outside, the garden looked dry. I hadn't watered it yet. So I stood, picked up the rusted watering can, and went out barefoot like I always did. The roses were wilting, but not beyond saving. They never are, if you water them in time. I whispered to them like Gerald used to do, telling them, still here, still standing. The truth was, I had known this day would come. Not just the paperwork, not just the push, but the moment my daughter would look at me and see an inconvenience. They say aging is just the body breaking down, but no one warns you what it feels like when your legacy begins to forget your name. It was a Thursday morning when Camille called and said she was stopping by. No reason, just to check in. Her voice was cheerful in a way that sounded practiced, like someone auditioning for concern. I spent the next hour wiping down the kitchen counters, fluffing the cushions on the couch, and setting out the lemon tea she used to love. I even made shortbread, just the way her grandmother taught me. She arrived with Ethan, of course. That alone should have told me something. Ethan always came along when something needed to be explained, when they wanted to talk, when I was expected to be reasonable. He greeted me with that easy smile of his, the one that didn't quite reach his eyes, but still looked nice in photographs. "Good morning, Mrs. Grant," he said, handing me a bag of overpriced organic pears. "Camille said you've been under the weather?" I hadn't been, but I nodded anyway. I was too tired to contradict pleasantries. Camille sat at the table like she had grown roots there, leaning back slightly, scanning the room, pausing for too long at the bookshelf. Ethan took the chair across from me. He leaned forward with elbows on the table, steepled fingers, and the gentle tone of a man trying to convince a jury he's just here to help. "We were just a little concerned," he began. I raised an eyebrow. Concerned about what? Camille picked up her teacup, didn't drink it, just held it. "Well," Ethan continued, "just small things. Forgetting appointments, missing calls. We figured it wouldn't hurt to make sure everything's all right." "I'm fine," I said. He smiled again, almost apologetically. "Of course, but you know how memory works at your age. Sometimes it's gradual, subtle." My hands clenched under the table, but I kept my voice steady. "I remember what matters." Ethan nodded like that answer proved his point. Camille finally spoke. "Mom," she said. Finally, Mom again, not Olivia. It surprised me more than it should have. "Do you remember my birthday?" I looked up at her. She said it so casually, like she was asking me to pass the sugar. But I heard what was behind it. I heard the clipboard in her mind checking off boxes. "June 12th, I said without blinking. 3 hours of labor, a thunderstorm, and a nurse named Helen who gave me ice chips and called me brave. Camille blinked, then looked down, then said, "Right, of course, just checking." They moved on, but something in me had already shifted. I saw it now. The way Ethan kept watching me, scanning for signs. The way Camille avoided eye contact, like she couldn't bear to see if I passed or failed whatever test they were running. They didn't come to visit. They came to evaluate. And the worst part was, a part of me wanted to pass, like some child begging to be kept. 맨날 따도 봄 뜻이 They asked more questions. Ethan, do you know what day it is? Camille, where did you put the checkbook, Mom? Ethan again. You ever get turned around driving lately? I kept answering, calmly, precisely, as if each response was a stitch in a net I was weaving to catch myself. But by the time they stood up to leave, my tea had gone cold again, and so had the air between us. At the door, Camille touched my arm. Mom, she said softly, we're not trying to upset you. We just want what's best for you. That was the moment I felt the deepest crack, because it's exactly what I used to say to her. When I took away her phone after a bad report card, when I told her no, she couldn't go to that party with the older boy. It's for your own good, because I care, because I love you. Now she was using those same words to justify stripping me of decisions, of dignity. It's a strange thing to be mothered by your own child. Stranger still when it doesn't come from love, but from control wrapped in kindness. They left without hugging me. They never hugged anymore. I stood in the doorway, watching their car disappear down the road. And for the first time in a very long time, I locked the door from the inside. That night, I couldn't sleep. I laid in bed, the ceiling fan slicing through the quiet like clock hands with nowhere to point. My mind kept replaying Camille's voice. Do you remember my birthday? Like I was a pop quiz on the verge of failing. At some point after midnight, I got up. I wandered through the dark house barefoot, the way I always did when Gerald was still alive. He used to say I moved like a ghost. Quiet as breath, Liv. I found myself in the study. The desk hadn't been touched since the day he passed. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to. There are some things you leave alone because they're sacred, and others because you're afraid of what you might find. But that night felt different. I pulled out the old wooden chair. Its legs creaked like old bones. The surface was dusted with time and quiet. I ran my fingers across the wood grain, then opened the top drawer. Pencils, a cracked ruler, and a few yellowed receipts. I tried the side drawer, stiff, but still moved. Underneath a stack of envelopes, I noticed something strange. A seam. At first, I thought it was just the bottom of the drawer peeling, but when I pushed, it gave way, revealing a thin wooden flap. A false bottom. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the hush of something long buried finally coming up for air. Inside was a leather folder, wrapped in a faded cloth handkerchief, and a note, folded, simple, with my name on the front in Gerald's handwriting. Liv. I sat back in the chair, letting the weight of the folder rest in my lap. The letter came first. Montadona. Liv. If you're reading this, it means I am gone. And chances are you're asking to sign something you shouldn't. I know you'd never assume the worst, especially not from Camille. But I also know how charm can be a weapon when it comes wrapped in concern. I paused, my throat tightening. You gave everything to this family, Liv. So before I left this earth, I wanted to make sure you'd never be left with nothing. Not by them, not by anyone. Everything, and I mean everything, is yours. There were more words, ones that filled my eyes and bent my spine, but it was what came next that changed everything. Inside the folder were documents, dozens, neatly arranged, dated, signed, notarized, the deed to the house, already transferred to my name 2 years before his death, 3 separate bank accounts under my sole ownership, a revocation of any prior power of attorney forms, and, tucked at the very back, a notarized letter stating that any future attempts to transfer property without my consent would be deemed fraudulent. He'd seen it coming, not because he didn't trust Camille, but because he knew how people change under pressure or under influence. Ethan. I sat there for over an hour, rereading every page, my tea going cold again beside me. The house they were trying to sell out from under me, it was mine, legally, unquestionably. The account they claimed would help manage my care, already secured, with my name, my terms, my access only. They thought I was alone, but Gerald, he had left me something better than company. He had left me clarity. There are moments in life where everything becomes sharp, not in anger, not in pride, just sharp. This was one of them. I looked around the study, the photos on the shelves, the books we used to read together, the curtains he insisted on keeping because they reminded him of sunlight. And then I looked down at that cracked leather folder. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the woman being cornered. I felt like the woman who still had her footing, still had her name. The day they brought the appraiser to my home, I was pruning the roses. They were early, not by much, just enough to catch me with my gardening gloves still on and dirt under my nails. I didn't let them see me rush. I simply stood, nodded, and said, "I'll put the kettle on." Camille smiled in that stiff way she had perfected over the years. Ethan was the one leading the charge, of course, clipboard in hand, already pointing things out to the appraiser before I even reached the porch. The appraiser was a woman, young, maybe late 20s. Her name was May, and she had this quiet, thoughtful look about her. She moved through my house as though it still meant something. That alone made me want to weep. Ethan barely let her breathe. "We're hoping to list it soon, so we'd like a quick turnaround," he said, patting the door frame. "Foundation solid, just cosmetic updates." I busied myself in the kitchen, arranging my grandmother's porcelain cups and warming a teapot. I could hear Camille explaining which fixtures they'd probably modernize. I heard my name. "Mom's okay with it," she said. "She understands this place is too much for her now." Too much? I stirred honey into the tea slowly. When I brought the tray into the living room, May was standing by the stained glass window, the one Gerald had installed on our 25th anniversary. It filtered soft crimson and amber light into the room. She turned as I set the cups down. "Your daughter mentioned this window might be removed during renovations," she said gently. I didn't look at Camille. I looked at May. My husband put that in with his own hands, I said, voice steady. He surprised me with it, said it made the morning light feel like we lived in a painting. May nodded slowly, then wrote something in her little notepad. Her eyes lingered on the window a moment longer than they needed to. Ethan moved to the fireplace. This whole mantle will likely go. We're thinking open concept. Buyers want space these days. Space. I poured tea for everyone, even though only May took a cup. Camille declined, distracted by a text message. Ethan didn't bother answering. He was already asking about average square footage comps. I watched him out of the corner of my eye, his voice low and insistent. Camille followed his lead like she always had, taking cues from the man who wore a wedding band and a veneer of competence, but not much else. It was like watching strangers inventory a museum I still lived in. May stepped into the study. "Do you still use this space?" she asked it. I smiled faintly. "Every morning, I write in that chair. Not novels or anything, just letters to myself." She tilted her head, genuinely curious. "That's lovely." Ethan popped his head in. "We'd probably convert this into a breakfast nook or maybe a sunroom. Depends on what the contractor suggests." Camille nodded. "And the bookshelves would go." Bookshelves Gerald built, filled with volumes he'd read aloud to me every Sunday when I had migraines. I sat down on the edge of the couch and folded my hands. "Tell me, May," I asked Ed, "how long have you been doing this?" 3 years, she replied. I did historic homes for a while before this. Her tone shifted, more reverent, more present. She ran her hand lightly along the edge of the fireplace. "These details, they don't build homes like this anymore." Camille's mouth thinned. "Sure, but charm doesn't pay for assisted living, does it?" I didn't flinch. I just watched May. And May looked back at me, really looked. Something passed between us. It wasn't pity. It was understanding. I stood and straightened a photo on the mantle, a picture of me, Camille, and Gerald at the beach. Camille must have been 6. Her hair still in pigtails, her arms wrapped tightly around my neck. They hadn't even noticed the photo until I moved it. May closed her folder. "I have what I need. I'll email the report in 2 days." "Perfect," Ethan said, already ushering her toward the door. Camille turned to me, voice casual. "You were great today, Mom. Really cooperative. That helps, you know." I smiled and nodded. "Of course." They left shortly after, Ethan still talking numbers, Camille tapping on her phone. Once the door closed, I poured myself another cup of tea. The room grew still again. The sunlight filtered through the stained glass window in soft reds and golds, just like it had the day Gerald installed it. I looked around and whispered, "They think I'm watching my home get taken from me." I lifted the teacup. They have no idea what I'm watching them do. I spent the afternoon preparing a roast. Not just any roast, Gerald's favorite. Slow cooked, seasoned with rosemary from the backyard herb patch he planted the year Camille was born. I even found the vintage linen napkins from our 10th anniversary, ironed and folded like I used to when we hosted Christmas dinners. The house smelled like memories, that warm, comforting blend of garlic, herbs, and hope. I set the table with the good silver, lit 2 candles, poured wine into the crystal glasses that hadn't seen daylight since Gerald's funeral. I knew Camille and Ethan would be back around 6. I wanted to offer them more than food. I wanted to offer a moment, a memory. They arrived precisely at 6:15. Camille didn't even take off her coat before scanning the table. "Mom, this looks elaborate," she said, her voice cautious. "It's just dinner," I replied, keeping my tone light. Like old times. Ethan sat down first, adjusting the napkin on his lap with the precision of a man who always seemed like he was in a courtroom, even at the dinner table. Camille followed, her eyes glancing over the roast, the mashed potatoes, the gravy boat. I served them quietly, pouring the wine, slicing generous portions, placing everything with care. They didn't touch their plates. Ethan cleared his throat. "We're vegan now." The words landed like broken glass in a church. "Oh," I said, the smile still on my face. "I didn't know." Camille gently pushed her plate aside. "It's okay, Mom. You didn't mean anything by it." I nodded, swallowed the tightness rising in my throat. Of course. No one reached for the food. I sat down anyway, took a small bite. The meat was tender, perfect, but it tasted like dust. The silence grew too loud. I tried to fill it. "Do you remember when we tried to make this roast in that tiny Vermont cabin? The oven caught fire halfway through. Gerald had to put it out with a snow shovel. Camille, you cried because we ended up eating canned beans on Christmas Eve." Camille didn't laugh. "We're trying to be more intentional with our choices," she said. "More aligned with our values." I smiled again, but my hand gripped the edge of the table. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the linen. "Olivia, we've been talking. We think it might be better, for everyone, if you start preparing to transition out of the house." My fork paused midair. Camille added quickly, "Nothing sudden. Maybe by the 1st of next month?" My eyes drifted to the stained glass window behind them. The one Gerald had installed himself, piece by piece, on our 25th wedding anniversary. The soft amber and deep blue shimmered behind them like forgotten dreams. I didn't answer. I simply rose from the table, gathered the untouched plates, and turned my back. "Mom?" Camille said gently, but I didn't respond. I rinsed the dishes under hot water, the steam blurring my glasses. The roast slid into the trash with a dull thud. They left shortly after. No dessert, no laughter, no goodnight hugs. Once the door closed behind them, I stood alone in the kitchen, my hands gripping the sink. The silence was heavy, but I didn't cry. Instead, I looked around at the home I had poured my soul into. The garden visible through the window. The worn wood floors Gerald had refinished with his own 2 hands. The etched initials in the back porch railing where Camille had once carved a heart beside a boy named Tyler. They wanted me gone, moved out like old furniture. But the walls here knew my name. The floorboards creaked in time with my steps. The wind through the stained glass told me stories only I could understand. I wasn't ready to answer their question about moving, about surrendering this space, this history. So I didn't. Instead, I picked up my wine glass, took a sip, and sat back down at the empty table. The candles still flickered gently, casting soft shadows across the tablecloth. Gerald once told me, "Sometimes strength isn't in speaking. It's in knowing when silence says more." Tonight, I chose silence. But silence, I realized, could be the beginning of something louder. Camille sat across from me at the old kitchen table, the one Gerald had refinished by hand during a winter we thought we wouldn't make it through. It was where Ethan had done his homework, where Camille had learned to write her name in careful, looping letters. Now, between us, sat a stack of legal papers, sterile, sharp, and completely at odds with the warmth of the wood they rested on. She smiled, that tight, polished smile she'd perfected in corporate boardrooms, and nudged the papers closer to me. "It's really simple, Mom. Just a signature. We've already spoken to the lawyer. All we need is your consent." I picked up the top sheet and ran my fingers along the edge. The paper was thick, expensive. They'd spared no cost to make this look official, irreversible. But I didn't read it. I didn't need to. Instead, I folded it, neatly and slowly, then placed it back on the table in front of her. I slid it across the grain like an offering. Except it wasn't. It was a decision. A line drawn with silence instead of ink. Camille blinked. "Mom?" I looked at her, really looked. Not at the adult mask she wore now, but at the little girl I once held on stormy nights. The teenager who once cried over boys and SAT scores. The woman who now wanted me out of the house her father and I built. The same house she now called an asset. "Do you know I used to work at the courthouse?" I said, my voice gentle, but unmistakably firm. That stopped her. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "What?" "I handled records," I continued. "Land transfers, property disputes, wills, deeds. It was part-time, but long enough to see how things can go wrong when people sign things they don't understand. Or worse, when they're made to feel like they don't have a choice." She stared at me like I was speaking a different language. "Gerald knew that about me," I added, my gaze steady. "It's why he always made sure I read everything. Twice. Even the fine print." A long pause stretched between us. In it, I could hear the echo of past dinners, laughter, Camille's childhood voice asking if she could lick the spoon. All of it felt like it belonged to another lifetime now. "You think we're trying to trick you?" she finally asked, voice quiet, almost offended. "I think," I said slowly, "that you stopped asking what I wanted a long time ago and started assuming I had no say." Her lips parted slightly, as if to argue, but I didn't give her the space. "I've been quiet, Camille. I've watched. I've made your tea. I've listened to your plans for this house, for my room, for my savings, like I'm already gone." My eyes didn't waver. "But I'm still here. I remember who I am." Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that presses against your ears and makes your heart race. She fidgeted in her chair, fingers tapping against the table's edge. I leaned forward, softly. "Do you remember what Dad used to say about power?" She hesitated, then shook her head. I smiled faintly. "He said, 'Power isn't loud. It's not shouting or slamming doors. Power is knowing when not to speak and when not to sign.'" Her cheeks flushed. Whether from embarrassment or anger, I couldn't tell. But I saw her swallow hard, the paper still untouched in front of her. "I'm not angry, Camille," I added. "I'm just awake now." She looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, she didn't speak. She simply gathered the papers, slid them back into her folder, and left them on the table without another word. As she walked out of the room, her heels clicking down the hallway, I felt something settle in me. A remembering, a reclamation. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't sign. But I spoke. And for the first time in a long time, I heard myself clearly. I only meant to stop in for oranges. A quick run to the market before the weekend. But fate has a way of placing the right mirrors in front of us when we most need to remember who we are. The grocery store hummed with the late afternoon chatter. I pushed my cart slowly past the produce section, the scent of ripened tomatoes and fresh dill stirring something oddly comforting in me. For the first time in weeks, I had a moment to myself. No whispers behind doors, no papers slid across tables, no ghost of Gerald's voice echoing in my ears. Just me, the fluorescent lights, and the small act of choosing between navel and blood oranges. I was reaching for a bag when I heard a voice. Soft, hesitant. Olivia? Olivia Markham? I turned slowly. A woman stood just a few feet away. Her hair was shorter now, flecked with silver, but her eyes, those eyes, I remembered them immediately. Alicia, I said, breath catching before I could help it. She smiled, though her hands trembled slightly on the cart. Oh my God, it is you. I hadn't seen her in almost 2 decades, but I used to see her every weekday morning. 8:15 sharp, outside Courtroom B. Nervous, too quiet, always holding a manila folder too tightly, like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Back then, she was just a junior clerk fresh out of college, barely 22, scared of saying the wrong thing, scared of not being heard when she said the right thing, scared of her own shadow some days. And yet, here she was. Strong posture, confident air. A quiet power about her I hadn't seen in those early years. I can't believe it's you, she said again, stepping forward. You look just the same. I laughed softly. Well, that's very kind of you, and very inaccurate. She chuckled, but then her eyes welled up. Not from laughter. I've always wanted to say thank you, she said, voice low, almost like a confession. I tilted my head. For what? She hesitated. Then, for believing in me, back then. A silence hung between us, warm, not heavy. There was that day, she continued. Remember the Powell trial? The defense tried to throw out the entire victim testimony over a typo in the docket. I nodded. They tried to intimidate you into signing a retroactive correction that would have invalidated key timestamps. Her eyes widened. You remember? I remember everything that mattered, I replied. She blinked quickly, holding back tears. Everyone else told me to just do what the senior clerk said, to stay in my lane. But you told me to trust the law, not the noise. You told me I had a voice. I had forgotten that. She reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. I didn't quit because of you. I stayed. And now, I run compliance for the county clerk's office. My eyes stung before I could stop them. I didn't realize how long it had been since someone remembered me as more than just a grandmother or a burden in someone else's home. I always wondered where you ended up, I said quietly. And I always hoped I'd get to thank you, she replied. We stood there for a moment, 2 women surrounded by pyramids of produce and the buzz of shopping carts, locked in a rare kind of stillness. The kind that rewinds the tape of your life and reminds you of the chapters no one sees but that define everything. Eventually, she glanced at her watch and sighed. I should go. My son's soccer game. Of course, I said, stepping aside. She began to walk away but turned back. Hey, Olivia? Yes? I don't know what's happening in your life right now, but if anyone's forgetting who you are, remind them you're the woman who held Courtroom B together when it was falling apart." My throat tightened. I nodded, unable to speak. That night, I sat on the edge of the guest bed, the one Camille made sure to place near the laundry room, and opened Gerald's wooden box again. Beneath the letters and files, tucked in a fold I hadn't noticed before, was an old badge, Clerk of the Court, issued 1989. It wasn't just a keepsake. It was proof. I stared at it for a long time. They thought I was invisible, but what they didn't know was that I'd once helped shape justice, that I'd once mattered in rooms where silence had power, and I was beginning to remember what that felt like. The first time I saw Talia James, she was walking briskly out of the legal aid office in downtown Charleston, carrying a stack of files almost taller than she was. Her afro puffed confidently above her head, her posture upright, her presence magnetic. I'd gone there on a whim, or perhaps it was something deeper, something that pulled me toward a truth I'd been too quiet to speak. She looked so young, but there was steel in her eyes. When I finally sat across from her in that modest office, everything felt smaller than I remembered courtrooms to be. There were no sweeping wooden benches, no echo of gavels, just laminate floors, a humming air conditioner, and a woman half my daughter's age who saw me fully. Perhaps for the first time in years. She didn't interrupt. Not once. Not when I told her about the temporary guardianship Camille and Ethan wanted me to sign. Not when I explained how they left brochures for assisted living homes on the kitchen counter, passive-aggressively arranged next to my reading glasses. Not even when I paused too long, when I clenched my jaw to keep from crying, or when my voice cracked at the part where Camille said, "It's just time, Mom. Time for us to take care of your things now." She just listened, hands folded, steady breath. The opposite of Camille, who always glanced at her phone mid-conversation, tapping replies with one thumb while nodding distractedly. And when I finally stopped speaking, unsure if I had built a case or just made a fool of myself, she leaned in slightly and said, "Miss Monroe, I don't think you're trying to keep a house. I think you're trying to keep your name." My chest tightened. It was true. It wasn't just about square footage or equity. It was about being seen, being remembered. It was about dignity. That was the moment I chose her. Not because I thought she was the most experienced. Not because I thought she could win. But because she understood what this was really about. On a level that had nothing to do with law and everything to do with justice. As we began going over the details, she pulled out a legal pad and took notes, not typing on a laptop, not recording me, just listening, pen to paper, like she respected my words enough to write them by hand. "I don't need to win," I told her softly. "I just need someone to hear me, to stand beside me as I speak. That's enough." She nodded slowly. Then she said something that took me back nearly 30 years. "You remind me of my aunt. She was quiet too, until she wasn't." There it was again, this subtle recognition that strength can be silent until it no longer serves to be. And as she asked about the stained glass window, about my husband's will, about the house deed, about any notarized statements, I realized I hadn't felt this steady in years. It was like something dormant inside me had stirred. But there was something else I hadn't told her yet. Something important. When we finished discussing legal options, I reached for my purse and pulled out an old photograph, creased at the corners, faded around the edges. It showed a courtroom, room B specifically, and behind the bench, before the judge entered, there I was, hair pinned up, wearing a navy skirt suit, back straight. A court clerk holding a file in my hands like it was sacred. I slid the photo across the desk. I used to work here, I said. I wasn't just someone's mother or wife. I was the one who passed the ruling to the judge, who verified the signatures, who held the silence in the room while families were being broken and stitched back together. Talia studied the photo with reverence. Her fingers touched the corner like it might crumble if handled too quickly. "Then you know the weight of every word," she whispered. I nodded. "I do." And that's when I knew, without ever saying it, that she would carry my voice like her own. Later, when she walked me to the door, I turned to thank her, but the words wouldn't come out. So I just smiled, and she said, "They don't know who they're up against, do they?" No, I thought, but soon they would. Because sometimes justice begins not in the courtroom, but in the quiet choice to finally be heard. The courtroom wasn't new to me, but this time, it wasn't my seat behind the clerk's desk I was walking toward. It was the plaintiff's side, my side, and that made all the difference. My shoes clicked softly against the linoleum as I entered. The room was cool, familiar, but not the same. Everything felt both smaller and heavier, like the past and present were colliding in that quiet space. Camille was already seated. She didn't look at me. Her hair was pulled into a sleek, ambitious bun, the kind that said, "I came to win." Ethan sat beside her, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit him right, fiddling with his watch. They leaned toward their attorney, whispering like children with secrets they thought would stay hidden. I placed my bag gently beside my chair and sat. I didn't look their way. The bailiff called the court to order. The gavel struck once, then twice more, as if confirming what we all felt. This moment was larger than whatever words would be spoken. And then he entered. Judge Mercer, a name I hadn't heard in over 20 years, gray at the temples now, broader in the shoulders. But I knew that face, knew it like an old song that plays on the radio and transports you back without asking. He climbed the steps to the bench, adjusted his robe, and opened the file before him. Then he looked up and stopped. Our eyes met. A pause, just long enough for the air to shift. He blinked once, then leaned slightly forward, narrowing his eyes. He set the file down, cleared his throat, looked again. The room held its breath. "You?" he said softly, more to himself than to the room. Then louder, with clarity, "Ms. Olivia Hartman." Camille looked up, confused. I didn't turn to her. Judge Mercer removed his glasses. "You were in courtroom B," he said. "Back when I first got assigned here. You processed my first hearing packet, remember that?" I nodded once. "I remember." He chuckled, but it was the kind of laugh that came with something heavier behind it. "You didn't just process my papers," he said to the room, his voice deepening. "You asked how my first day went. You told me not to let the system make me cynical. You said, 'Kindness in a courtroom isn't weakness.' I never forgot that." He looked out over the room. "She made me believe I could matter." Silence. The court reporter paused. The typing stopped. Even Camille, for all her steel, shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I didn't speak. I didn't need to, because the truth was standing there, upright, polished, and wearing a black robe. Because it had waited patiently through the years, and now it had come to stand beside me. I let the moment stretch, held it like a soft ribbon in my hands. Camille's lawyer cleared his throat, trying to reclaim the room with legalities. Your Honor, we'd like to proceed with the motion. Judge Mercer raised a hand. In time, Counselor. He looked back at me. I don't imagine you're here lightly, Miss Hartman. I offered him a small smile. Not lightly, but not bitterly either. He nodded once, slowly, and then returned his gaze to the bench. Camille was fuming now, her brows tight with questions, confusion, calculation. I could see her brain spinning, trying to grasp who I really was, trying to reconcile the mother she thought she could manipulate with the woman sitting calmly across from her, being recognized by a judge. A woman with a past, with quiet power, with dignity that didn't need raising its voice to be heard. I didn't look at her. Instead, I looked at the ceiling, the faded panels where I used to count while waiting for jury verdicts. I let my eyes trace the walls I once passed every day. Let the memories wash over me like soft echoes of a life that had mattered, even if no one at home had remembered. And in that silence, I found something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, not victory, not revenge, just peace, the kind that wraps around your shoulders like a shawl you almost forgot you owned. The hearing would go on, motions would be made, arguments delivered, papers filed. But in that moment, before any of it began, I had already won, because someone remembered, because the truth had waited for me here, because Camille, my own daughter, was finally seeing me, not just as a mother, but as a woman with a life far larger than her expectations. I turned slightly, just enough to meet her eyes. She was staring. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The courtroom was colder now, though maybe it was just me. Or maybe it was the silence that fell as Talia stood, calm and collected, like the tide right before it pulled away from the shore to become something bigger. She began simply, Your Honor, we would like to submit a motion to include supplemental evidence, recordings, medical documentation, and security footage that clarify my client's mental state. Camille's head snapped toward her like a struck match. What is this? She whispered, more to Ethan than the room. The judge nodded, adjusting his glasses. Proceed. Talia moved to the small table, handed over a slim folder, then glanced at me. Not a dramatic look, just enough for me to know she had listened, that she understood I wasn't here to win. I was here to be seen. She tapped the first tab open. This is a full cognitive evaluation conducted just 5 months ago. No signs of memory loss, confusion, or dementia. In fact, the notes highlight Miss Olivia's above-average recall and logical reasoning for her age. I didn't move, didn't blink. Let the words stand like small fires lighting the room. She went on. Here is the recording from the public library. Miss Olivia reserved computer time, logged in with her card, and printed the original deed. The one she kept in her drawer, not the corrected one submitted by the opposing party. Camille was shifting now, visibly. I could feel her fidgeting through the silence. Ethan stayed unnervingly still, his jaw locked, his fingers laced tightly in front of him like a man in prayer, or pretending to be in prayer. Talia then clicked a device. A soft voice filled the courtroom. It was Camille's. "You just have to sign it, Mom. You're forgetting things anyway. Let us handle it. Just put your name down, okay? You don't want to embarrass yourself again, do you?" It wasn't yelling. That was the terrifying part. It was calm, smooth, rehearsed. Like this wasn't the first time she'd played both daughter and manipulator in one breath. People in the courtroom shifted. Someone gasped faintly. Then the last thing Talia submitted: my journals. Pages scanned, dated, marked in handwriting only mine. March 4th. Camille pushed again today. I pretended not to understand. It buys me time, but I see it now. It's not just control, it's erasure. She wants me forgotten before I'm even gone. I sat still as the judge read, and when he looked up, his eyes weren't cold anymore. They carried that familiar sheen, recognition, not just of a former clerk, but of a person who chose not to scream when screaming would have been easier. Camille stood up suddenly. "She wrote those herself. She probably faked them after I left the house." The judge raised a hand. "Enough, Miss Camille," then turned. "Miss Olivia, do you have anything to say?" My mouth felt like it had sand in it, but my voice was clear. I didn't fight back when she blamed me. I didn't argue when she called me forgetful or old or irrelevant. I didn't scream when she tried to replace my name on the house deed. I just remembered. I turned my head slightly. Sometimes remembering is louder than shouting. Camille sat down like someone had unplugged her. Her cheeks burned red, her eyes wide. But Ethan, he leaned toward her, whispered something with that same crooked smile he used when he first brought her home. The smile I never liked. He wasn't rattled. Not yet. But he would be. Because the truth wasn't just about what they tried to take. It was about what I still had. My mind, my records, my voice. And now, my witnesses. Talia rested a hand gently on the table beside me. I didn't look at her, but I felt it. The reassurance, the quiet power of being believed by someone who had no reason to doubt me, but chose not to anyway. Across the room, I watched Camille slowly realize this wasn't going away. And Ethan, he wasn't smiling anymore. The courtroom was hushed, thick with the tension of unraveling truths. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, watching my daughter's face from across the polished floor. She avoided my gaze, but I could tell her composure was cracking. There was something in the way her fingers picked at the hem of her blazer, in the way her eyes kept shifting, not with confidence, but with a child's panic in the dark. The judge had called a brief recess. The air was heavy. Camille didn't stand to stretch or consult with Ethan. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, pretending to adjust her papers. But then, her lips moved. Soft, barely audible. I'm just scared to be alone." The words floated across the space between us, not like an attack or an accusation, but like a confession. She didn't look at me when she said it. Her gaze stayed fixed on a point just above my shoulder. She must have known no one else could hear. Not the judge, not the court clerk, not even Ethan, who sat so close to her their shoulders nearly touched. But I heard it. Clearer than anything she'd ever screamed at me. Louder than her accusations. more real than all the cold silence she'd weaponized against me for years. I felt the breath leave my body, not in shock, not in triumph, just in something deeper, like grief, like recognition, like watching a dying star flicker for the last time. I didn't respond, not with words. Instead, I looked at her, fully. My eyes met hers. There was no pity in my gaze, no anger either, only the truth of everything that had passed between us, what was said, and more importantly, what was left unsaid. She flinched when our eyes locked. That was the moment she blinked. And in that blink, I saw Camille as she once was, barefoot in the kitchen, reading books under the blanket with a flashlight, running down the hallway when she had a nightmare. Not the woman in the stiff gray suit, but the little girl who used to trace the lines on my palm and ask if they were roads. But memory is not permission, and love is not license. So I said nothing, because some moments are too sacred to be filled with words. I broke the gaze gently, turning instead to take a sip from the glass of water before me. My hands didn't shake. I was calm, not because it didn't hurt, but because for the first time in decades, I wasn't the one holding the pain alone. Camille had picked up a piece of it herself. Ethan, however, noticed the shift instantly. He wasn't looking at her with concern, but with control. His lips thinned. His hand curled into a fist, then relaxed again as if rehearsing the mask of calm. "What did you just say to her?" he hissed at Camille through clenched teeth. Camille didn't answer. She kept her eyes down now, on the notepad in front of her. One finger traced the rim of her coffee cup. Her jaw clenched, then released. It was small, but it was everything. Ethan's panic was quieter than Camille's, but no less visible. He leaned over, whispering something urgent to their attorney. I didn't need to hear the words. I'd seen that look 1,000 times before. On patients, on liars, on people watching the sand slip too quickly through the hourglass. And now, he was the one blinking. Talia returned from the hallway, briefcase in hand, calm as a still lake. She gave me a reassuring glance before adjusting her files. The recess was almost over. The judge would walk in any second. But the battle had already begun to shift. Camille stole one last glance at me before court resumed. But I didn't meet it this time. I looked past her, beyond the walls, to something no one in that room could see. To a quiet part of myself that had been waiting, not for revenge, but for clarity. My daughter had blinked, and in that split second, she revealed more than years of accusations ever had. Not because she apologized, but because fear had finally broken through her pride. And while I didn't answer her plea out loud, in my heart, something softened. Not enough to forget, but maybe enough to stop bleeding. The gavel struck. Everyone stood. I rose slowly, deliberately. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't standing for someone else. I was standing for me. The judge cleared his throat, eyes never leaving mine. The silence in the courtroom was so thick, it almost hummed. Talia's hands were folded calmly on the table, her composure a quiet mirror of my own. Camille sat stiffly, eyes darting between the judge and Ethan. He whispered something sharp into her ear, but she didn't flinch this time. Her face was unreadable. Then the judge spoke. "In light of the evidence provided, and the testimony that reflects not only Ms. Olivia Baines's capacity, but her consistent clarity of mind throughout this ordeal, I hereby void the existing power of attorney signed under questionable conditions and restore full authority and rights to Ms. Baines over her estate and property. I didn't exhale. Not yet. And regarding the property transfer to Ms. Camille Hartwell, this court deems it fraudulent and coerced. All titles and ownership revert to Ms. Baines, effective immediately. Still, I waited. I didn't trust the heir to stay still. Then he looked straight at me. Ms. Baines, the court extends its gratitude to you, not just for your strength during this process, but for the legacy of dignity you've maintained. He leaned forward just slightly. Years ago, when I was fresh out of law school, unsure if I belonged in this world, you processed my first legal filing at the county clerk's office. You looked me in the eye and said, "Even when they underestimate you, show up like you matter." I never forgot that. Forgot. You helped me believe I could become someone worth listening to. The air finally moved. I blinked, slowly, but said nothing. Camille lowered her head. Ethan rolled his eyes, his jaw tightening. For once, he had no smirk, no comment, just a flicker of disbelief, like the ground had shifted beneath him, and he couldn't find his footing. Then the judge continued. Ms. Baines, the city recently approved a pilot mentorship program pairing experienced community figures with aspiring public service professionals. We would be honored to invite you as one of the inaugural mentors. I froze. Of all the things I thought would come after this, quiet, rest, maybe a walk in my garden, I never imagined this. I looked at Talia. She gave me a soft nod, but I turned back to the judge and answered with the calm I had earned. I'm honored, I said, but I'll have to decline. I think I finally learned that my peace is not a prize I'm willing to trade anymore. He smiled and respected it. Then came the question of financial damages. Talia stood and presented our final motion: compensation for emotional distress, legal fees, and attempted financial exploitation. The judge nodded. A fair claim, given the circumstances. But I rose before he could sign. Your Honor, I said, my voice steady, I'd like to withdraw the request for financial compensation. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even Talia turned to me, confused. I didn't come here to take. I came to keep what was mine. And to remember who I am, I said. I looked at Camille, just for a breath. She wouldn't meet my eyes this time. I believe justice doesn't need to shout. It only needs to be seen. I meant every word. The judge nodded, and it was done. After the session, people stood, not out of obligation, but in respect. I heard someone whisper my name with reverence, like I had survived something most couldn't name. Talia and I walked out together, the heavy courthouse doors closing behind us. She didn't say much, just slipped her hand gently into mine and squeezed. We were two women from different times, different scars, but there was a thread between us now. Outside, the autumn air was crisp. The sun had shifted slightly since morning, casting long shadows on the stone steps. I turned to her. You'll make a fine lawyer, Talia. Not because you speak well, but because you listen better than most people breathe. She smiled, genuine, warm, quiet. And for the first time in months, I felt taller. Not because I'd won, not because I'd exposed them, but because I hadn't lost myself in the fire. I chose peace over pride. And I walked home, not with vengeance in my chest, but a stillness I had waited a lifetime to feel. 3 months had passed since the courtroom fell silent in my favor. The house no longer echoed with legal jargon or quiet dread. Instead, I filled the mornings with the sound of my old record player, soft jazz, scratchy but honest. I found comfort in simple things again. My tea steeped strong, the roses finally blooming the way John liked them, and no footsteps creeping down my hallway at midnight that didn't belong to me. I had just finished dusting the bookshelf when I heard the knock. Not the forceful kind. This one was soft, uncertain. I opened the door to find Camille standing there, disheveled, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Her hair was tied in a lopsided knot. Her arms cradled something wrapped in a faded yellow blanket. A baby. My daughter, she said quietly. Her name's Grace. Grace. The name John and I used to dream about when we thought we might have another child. It hung in the air between us like some ghost of a gentler past. She's beautiful, I said, not as a mother forgiving, but as a woman recognizing life. I don't know where else to go, Camille confessed. Ethan's gone. Disappeared after the verdict. Took everything, even the apartment. I have no money, no one. There was a long pause. I need a place to stay, just a few weeks, until I figure things out. I stepped aside. She hesitated, then walked in slowly. The baby whimpered. My eyes scanned Camille's frame. She had lost weight, and the once polished young woman was now a shadow, physically and emotionally frayed. I led her to the guest room. You can put the baby down in here. Thank you, she whispered. Really, I don't deserve this. She was right. Later that night, over the clink of silverware and leftover vegetable stew, she tried to talk, stumbling through apologies, half-finished explanations. I listened, but I didn't respond much. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking for survival. After dinner, as she stood to wash the dishes, I stopped her with a quiet but firm voice. Camille. She turned. You may stay for a few weeks, but there are conditions. She nodded, eyes already brimming with the fear of rejection. Anything. I will not be raising your daughter for you. This is not a reset button. I'm not stepping back into the role of the woman you tried to erase. She flinched. I didn't soften. I will not cook for you, clean up after you, or be blamed when you feel inadequate. If you want to stay here, you earn that space every day with respect. For this house, for me, and most importantly, for yourself. Her lip trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might walk out. Instead, she sat down. Grace nestled against her chest. I understand. I do. And I don't expect you to believe me, but I've started seeing things more clearly. Since she was born, it's like I woke up. I leaned back, arms crossed. Words are air, Camille. Show me. She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. I'll start tomorrow. I'll help around the house. I'll figure out work. Please, don't shut the door on me yet. I didn't promise her anything. Instead, I got up, cleared the table, and said quietly, We'll see. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me. Grace's soft cries echoed from the other room. It wasn't forgiveness I felt. Not yet. But it also wasn't rage anymore. It was space, a cautious opening, like the crack of a door that had once been bolted shut. Over the next few days, Camille kept her word. She woke early. She cooked. She scrubbed the bathroom I never let her enter before. She rocked Grace when she cried and stayed up feeding her, never once asking me to take over. There were moments when I'd catch her staring at me, like she was remembering something, or mourning who she'd been. And sometimes, when she thought I wasn't looking, she smiled at Grace in that helpless, wide-eyed way only a mother who's scared she might fail ever does. Still, I didn't rush to mend what was broken. That wasn't my job anymore. But I did leave a folded towel and a lavender soap bar outside her room one night. Just once. She never said thank you. She didn't need to. That was our truce. And in the quiet hum of domestic order, no courtrooms, no screaming, no lies, there was finally the beginning of something else. Not redemption, but responsibility. She would stay, for now, and I would watch. Boundaries were not walls. They were invitations, with rules. And for the first time, Camille didn't try to climb over them. She knocked, and I let her in. Morning came the way it always did in my house. Slow, gentle, without announcement. I rose before Camille and the baby, boiled the kettle, and reached for the chipped mug I had refused to replace all these years. The crack running down its side had deepened, but it still held. So had I. I placed it by the window as steam curled upward. Outside, the roses leaned toward the early light. Their leaves glittered with dew, each droplet fragile yet resilient. I slipped on my old sweater, carried the watering can, and stepped into the garden. The soil was cool beneath my shoes. I knelt, pressed my palm against the earth, and felt its quiet heartbeat. It reminded me I was still rooted here, no matter what storms had passed. The mailbox creaked when I opened it. Inside, there were 3 letters bound together with twine. Handwritten envelopes, edges soft from travel. I carried them back inside, set them on the kitchen table, and poured tea into my mug. By then, Camille had stirred. She came in carrying Grace, whose cheeks were still rosy from sleep. She looked at the letters, curious. "Who are those from?" I slid the bundle closer. "Read them." She opened the first. The paper trembled in her hands as she read aloud. "Dear Miss Baines, I want to thank you for speaking with me outside the courthouse that day. You told me not to be ashamed of leaving my son's house after he shouted at me. Because of you, I moved in with a friend, and for the first time in years, I feel safe. With gratitude, Margaret." Camille looked up, her voice caught between surprise and guilt. "Mom, you helped her?" I nodded once, sipping my tea. There was no courtroom that day, just a bench outside. Sometimes listening is all it takes. She opened the second letter. I almost signed away my apartment because my daughter insisted she knew best. But then I heard your story on the community program. You said, silence isn't surrender. It's space to gather your strength. I tore up the papers. I still have my home. Thank you. Camille's lips parted, but no words came. Grace squirmed in her arms, reaching toward the table as if she, too, wanted to touch the letters. Finally, Camille opened the third. I never knew I had choices until I watched you stand in court. You didn't shout, but you were heard. Because of that, I told my in-laws no for the first time in my life. My children saw me, maybe for the first time. With respect, Eleanor. Camille folded the page slowly, pressing it to her chest. Mom, she whispered, did you really help all these women? I rested the mug on the windowsill, letting the morning light pass through the steam. I also needed help once, I said softly. But before anyone could give it, I had to help myself. Camille's eyes welled, but she didn't hide them this time. She nodded, looking down at Grace. I think I understand now. We sat together in silence. The baby cooed, the kettle clicked as it cooled, and the roses outside stood tall in the breeze. For the first time in years, the silence between us wasn't heavy. It was honest. A pause, not a wall. I glanced at my chipped mug, old, imperfect, still carrying warmth. It had become my anchor, my reminder that strength isn't about being flawless. It's about holding on long enough to heal. Camille traced the rim of one letter with her finger. Do you think they'll ever forgive me? The way you forgive them? I didn't answer with words. Instead, I turned back to the window, watching the garden sway. Forgiveness wasn't a gift I could hand her. It was a seed she'd have to plant herself. But I smiled. And for now, that was enough. Camille was humming to herself in the kitchen. Her shoulders moved in a rhythm that was no longer frantic or bitter, just quiet, deliberate motion. She was setting the table for two, occasionally pausing to peek into the living room where I sat with her daughter asleep in my arms. The baby's breath was warm against the skin of my collarbone. Her tiny fingers clutched the edge of my shawl like I was her anchor in a world she hadn't yet figured out. I felt her heartbeat sync with mine. Fast, full of life, unburdened. I remember thinking how odd it was that this little person, only a few weeks old, could bring a weightless kind of peace to a room that had once been full of so much tension. My hand stroked her back gently, up and down, as the light outside dipped gold over the garden. The roses were still blooming, Gerald's roses. They bloomed as if they had no memory of frost. Dinner's almost ready, Camille said, her voice soft. Not careful, just soft. I nodded, not taking my eyes off the baby. Thank you. There was a pause. I could hear the silverware being adjusted, then silence. Then her footsteps came toward me, cautious but not hesitant. She sat across from me, watching as I held her daughter. She looks like you, she said quietly. When you smile. I didn't reply, not because I didn't believe her, but because I wasn't sure how much of myself I still recognized. The woman I used to be had given everything to this family, and somewhere along the line, she'd gotten erased. But holding that child, this child born from brokenness, I felt something reassemble, something quiet but unshakable. Camille leaned forward slightly, watching my face. Mom, I turned to her. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I've been trying, really trying. Her voice didn't tremble. It carried no demand. I didn't realize how much I carried from you until she was born. And I don't want to pass down the wrong things. For the first time, she didn't sound like someone looking for forgiveness. She sounded like someone seeking clarity. I looked back at the sleeping baby, Then to Camille again. You know, I began slowly. Your father once told me something when I wanted to walk away from everything. She tilted her head. What did he say? I smiled faintly. Don't shrink, Liv. When the time comes, rise. Camille was quiet for a long beat. I didn't win because I fought, I said, stroking the baby's hair. I won because I remembered who I was. That wasn't just about the court case. It was about every quiet moment I chose not to explode, every boundary I finally drew, every time I chose not to apologize for surviving. Camille looked down at her hands. Then, without a word, she got up and walked back into the kitchen. I watched her move, not to flee, but to finish. She returned with the water pitcher and a small dish of lemon slices, just the way I liked it. And as she set them down, she whispered, I'm not perfect, but I'm not walking away this time. Her voice didn't beg. She just said it like a truth. I stood, cradling the baby close, and walked to the window. Outside, the shadows had begun to stretch long across the lawn. The same old rocking chair sat on the porch, the one Gerald had painted in his last summer. The garden was still. The cracked mug sat on the windowsill. The one Camille had broken all those months ago, now glued back together, imperfect but whole. I had put it there as a reminder that not everything broken needed replacing. Some things simply needed understanding. And as the baby stirred slightly in my arms, I knew this story would never have a perfect ending, but it had a different one of stillness, of boundaries respected, of voices found again, and maybe, just maybe, a beginning. I looked back one last time. Camille was wiping down the table, methodically, just as I used to when she was small, and watching me with wide eyes from her booster seat. She caught me watching and offered a tiny smile. Tentative, but real. I didn't return it. I just held her gaze. And in that silence, I hope she understood. Some doors don't swing open again. They creak slowly. They require care. And if she wanted to come through, it wouldn't be as a child. It would be as a woman finally ready to see. So now I'll ask you, the ones listening, if it were your daughter, would you let her back in? Or would you have shut the door for good?